So good afternoon. I'm Nancy Zimfer, Senior Fellow at the National Association of System Heads, our host today, and our topic, the big rethink, public university systems in a post-pandemic world. So I want to welcome each and every one of you for joining today. Many of you have been with us on this journey from the onset of the pandemic up until literally today. Our goal today is to share data from a survey many of you completed back in October. We went through November and December with analyses and now are ready to share. We very much want your views on what you're learning from the survey, and as importantly, where there might be gaps and how you would add to the agenda. And we also want to recruit your help going forward. So while I'm still on this slide and you have that title of our work emblazoned there, let me just remind you about the big rethink. It is, of course, born out of what now are characterized as three pandemics. Of course, our health crisis caused by the COVID virus. But as importantly, the racial injustices tragically exposed by the death of George Floyd. We knew this, but we know it better and more now. And then on top of all of that, an economic crisis caused by the loss of jobs and a loss of a sense of livelihood that so many could not control and are victims of. So in the midst of going remote in February and ultimately in March, it seems that our board was smart beyond their years. They knew that while we were dealing with the everyday crisis of remote instruction and turning ourselves into remote literally on a dime, that we still had to keep in mind the big picture. And it was in a board discussion where Rebecca, our executive director, and our board, and ultimately our membership, began to talk about getting on the balcony. This is a concept that Heifetz and Laurie have talked about in the work of leadership, that while you're in the fray of on the ground, blocking and tackling, in this case, to go remote and to go so effectively for our students, our faculty, and our staff, we need to keep our eye on the big picture. People begin to call this the new normal. What would we, post-secondary education, in fact, what would most sectors across the country be like after the pandemic? Well, perhaps no one could have imagined that it would drag on this long and that we would still be remote in many corners. But I think it's really important that we understand where we got to in the big rethink, and as importantly, the challenge of getting to an agenda that says we're ready for a new normal. And of course, I would be remiss if I didn't say we want to do this together. We see this as a collaborative endeavor. We see it as an outgrowth of this notion of systemness, that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts, and that we are in fact a system of systems or a network of systems. So I'm going to show you the calendar and how we're moving this agenda forward. But first, let me introduce you to our leadership team. These are familiar faces to you indeed. Where would we be without Rebecca Martin, our executive director? She is the director of all things, but she's also a very good delegator. So in that process, we now have senior fellows at NASH. I am one, Jason Lane, currently Dean of Education at the University at Albany and also director of the Systems Center, which is partnering with NASH, will be with us today and guiding the discussion. And then Jim Johnson is a relatively new senior fellow, and while you won't hear him today, you will see his hand at work. He was formerly the president of the University of Alaska system. So that's our team, and we'll be doing the work. You'll see that project manager Maria Kahn is also with Jason at the University of Albany. So we thank you all for your leadership. So as I move to the next slide, I just want to forewarn you, it's busy, but then so are we. So the first thing I want to do is talk a little bit about what happened in 2020. So if we consider the starting point, our exercise in going remote, It was at the April board meeting and a lot of discussion in between while we were shifting to online or remote instruction that the board thought about this notion of going to the balcony. And in the course of literally May to December, we had multiple webinars. You know that because not only did you go remote and halfway back and then remote again, you are exhausted largely because of the burden placed to make that happen for our students. And what I want to say is we convened CAOs, CFOs, CDOs, the Taking Student Success to Scale, the TS3 leadership team, on conversation after conversation about a new normal and a new agenda. And in the course of that, we also developed the survey that you're going to look at today. But as importantly, this big rethink seemed to take two paths. And I wanted to make that clear as well. What you see in the subtitle at the top of the page, the transformation agenda for public university systems in a post-pandemic world, is really about what we as systems will become in this new normal. But at the same time, we're very devoted, committed to entering into the literature what systems are about. It seems that not enough people know enough about systems and their founding. Now, 50, 60 years ago, the University of California system, the work of Clark Kerr, quite frankly, the work of the Carnegie Foundation for the Advancement of Teaching on a commission on higher education, and their birth these systems. We need to document that, and so we have a proposal that we're working through, being referee reviewed right now with the Johns Hopkins University Press, where we will be able to document our present and our future as systems. So now let's look at 2021, because this is really where we are today. We are introducing data sharing in this webinar around a framework we call Imperatives for Higher Education Systems Success. And this framework, which you'll see in a minute, is divided into 5 parts. And today we will be discussing 2 planks of that platform: redefining student success and restructuring the education model for quality and equity. We will have 3 webinars, January, February, and March, analyzing the data and filling in the gaps. And then we want to take a deeper dive on each element of the framework using a design team analysis, and I'll say more about that in a minute. So literally April, May, June, July, and August, we will take each component of this framework and dig even deeper to what that new normal should look like. And then, because we want to make sure we have consensus and buy-in of as many systems as possible, by the way, not only our 40+ members of NASH as systems, but the other systems that maybe will join our discussion as well. That would be 60 in total. And you know that that initiative, that 60 system view, gives us 75% of the public undergraduate students in America. So it's a big deal. And we want to take as many as possible through this Delphi process, a modified technique to enjoin consensus. And then a super convening in November, where we bring together all of you, the 100+ of you, and the authors of the chapters in this definitive work on systems, current day and future, and ultimately roll our recommendations into the NASH board and hopefully join other systems as well and our membership, so that when we go into 2022, we are actually executing a transformation agenda. So on the next slide, you'll see this framework. We've been talking about these imperatives for higher education systems. The ones I haven't mentioned yet: fundamentally reducing the cost base, very popular item, partnering with a purpose, and leading the transformation process. So we will come back to this figure, this framework, over and over again today and in the months forward. But there's one more thing we want to ask of you. As we drill down, and the next slide will show this, as we drill down on those 5 imperatives, We want design thinking. In fairness, this one is derived from design thinking a la Stanford, but many of you are engaged in design thinking, and we're not going to hold you to an exact process. But our vision is that we will organize a design team around each of the 5 planks in our imperatives platform. And today we will be soliciting volunteers. So I want you to be thinking not just about the 2 issues that we will discuss today, but about all 5 and where you see your talents. We'll be taking volunteers literally in the chat, and we will follow up to get your feedback in an email just to keep you engaged. So I'm thrilled to introduce both Jason Lane and Rebecca Martin because they'll be presenting the data. And let me turn first to Jason.
Great, thanks so much, Nancy, for that overview. And part of what we want to do today is drill down on some of these particular areas that we were interested in the survey, first being redefining student success, and then we're going to be redesigning the academic programs for equity and quality. To do this, though, we're going to share some information, but we also want your feedback. And so we're going to use Mentimeter as a way to think about gather your data. It's in the text box there, but if you would open a browser or take out your phone and go to www.menti.com, it will ask you to put in a number and put that number on the screen. If it's easier to copy and paste it, you can click on the chat box, and Courtney has put the code in there for you. I will give you a second to do that. Because as Nancy mentioned, this is a journey, and along this journey, we want to gather as much information as possible. So while you're doing that, let me talk a little bit about imperative 1. So if we could go forward, thank you, Rohit. Redefining student success was very much about, excuse me 1 second. The joys of at home. I've got little ones crashing the party. So the imperative 1, redefining student success, is very much core to what we've been doing in NASH for a long time. Many of you know about taking student success to scale. This is an area where we have tried to scale evidence-based practices, particularly around high and best practices, redesigning math pathways, and guided pathways using predictive analytics. It's very much about putting students at the center of the work as opposed to necessarily the institutions, right? It really is building on our commitment to reaching new populations and underserved communities, which if you look into the data today that has come out around applications, this is a population where we have more concern about whether or not access there is increasing or decreasing. And certainly thinking about equity across all of this and how do we improve equity. So first, what we're going to do is show you the selections that we asked others to evaluate previously. And so we go to the next slide, Rohit. Now, just as a reminder, you all received these in a package yesterday from Rebecca. So you have this already. These are the areas that we asked respondents of a survey to rank as a top priority for them. That's what we're going to ask you to do today as well. You can read through these quickly here, but these are a range of opportunities to rethink everything from do we eliminate entrance exams to how do we think differently about creating academic, how do we think differently about advising students and the work in that. So Rohit, if we can go to the next slide. On Mentimeter, so go back to that web page you opened or that cell phone page that you looked at, and you'll see that list that we just very quickly scanned through. And what we're asking you to do is to think about picking the top 5 strategies that you think have the most potential to be transformative and could also benefit from a collective approach or collective action. So we're sort of asking you to use those 2 questions as you think about the top 5 that you select out of that group. And then as you select, we will see here your rankings, right? How you all have rated those. So, it's not, you don't have to rate the top 5, just pick top 5 in any particular order that you think are the most transformative. And what I'll say, when we first did the survey, what we asked people initially, what were the most important areas to tackle. And so when I talk about the data in a minute, that was basically the most important. We've reframed the question a bit for this group, and the way we're thinking about it is to think more about what's the most transformative approaches to take in terms of redefining student success. And certainly a lot of that is, how do we rethink the work of systems in all of this, right? And what's the role of systems in advancing student success? So here we see, it looks like, measurable metrics for equity out to an early lead, new credentialing structures, and increasing support for alternative delivery systems also being popular. I will say in the early data that we had, new credentialing structures and increasing alternative delivery supports right at the top, along with increasing appeal to adult students, shifting those populations. Right behind that would be the areas of better metrics for equity, streamlining cross-campus registration, designing strategies for the new market. So we're continuing to shift. So if you haven't already, please go in and pick your top 5 and submit those. All right, so what we see, I think clearly in this one, right, is really thinking about those metrics for equity. How do we really think about equity and the equity gaps? How do we better assess equity, issues of equity in our data? And being able to identify those issues are critical for addressing them. All right, but right in there, again, like the data we had before, increasing support for alternative delivery systems and creating new credentialing structures are right at the top. And obviously that's reflective of the changing environment we're in as we rethink what a degree and a credential looks like and how do we offer those. What I should also note is if you have questions along the way, feel free to put those in the chat box as well, or comments. If things on here you want to comments about what you're seeing in terms of the data as well, we want to hear from you in that. Obviously, increasing the appeal to adult students, I think, aligns with alternative delivery systems and new credentialing. So will the results of the polls be shared? Yes, we will share the polls. Right, Rebecca?
Definitely.
Yes, okay. So yes, we'll capture these and reshare them, and I'm going to share with you data from the survey we already did from the systems that have responded to this already. So here are the results from previous data we've already collected. Again, you'll see some similarities. The poll we just did, equity was at the highest. Here we had equity a little bit behind a couple of others, but right at the top, right? That's a critical issue, is really thinking about issues of equity in a wide range of ways. But again, increasing alternative delivery systems, critically important, right? How do we really think about the ways that we're delivering education? Of course, we got rocked with that is COVID, and it really forced us to be more nimble in thinking about delivery systems, both in terms of how we deliver it, but I think also the ways that we might structure programs. Thinking at new credentialing structures, the move toward micro-credentialing, the move toward badges, the alternative ways to bring people into the fold. In the last one, we saw what you don't see all the way off to the right. If your screen's like mine, there's a bunch of talking heads over it, but all the way on the right is an increasing appeal to adult students. That was popular in the data we just saw. That was also popular in the data that we collected from the survey. And I think that's very much a response to the decrease in traditional age high school students, particularly looking at around 2026 in the Midwest and the Northeast. But we know that we need to really rethink how we serve that population as well. So thank you for taking the time. If you have more questions or comments, feel free to put those there in the chat box as we move forward. Rebecca, do we have a moment to sort of see if people have thoughts or reactions to this?
Sure, we do.
I think we do.
So why don't we take a few minutes and hear from folks? So you can put a question in the chat or raise your hand or unmute yourself and talk. I think that we have a big group here, but we certainly have time to hear some of your voices directly. And so we'd really love to hear your reactions to this.
And Rohit, maybe we can go to the last slide that we just, the poll slide, and we can put that back up there. People might have reactions to this as well.
You know, one of the things that we wanted to stress here also is not only what's most transformative, but also where could we really benefit from doing this collectively? Those of you that have been actively involved in TS3 know that we're all about learning from one another, from encouraging you to think about doing things across your network of campuses in each of your systems, but also the things that we could do together as a group of systems. How could we move this agenda forward? And that's really behind a lot of what we are going to be asking the design teams to think about as they look at each of these areas. So Rebecca Karoff, do you want to unmute yourself and make your comment about combining the strategies?
Sure. Several of them struck me as being interrelated, and not that you want to focus on too much, but some of the ones around how you design services and strategies for adult students or other targeted markets of students who are non-traditional stop-out employers, communities. And actually, so that's number 10 and 12. I actually think number 1 could also be integrated as a component of those directions to serve other kinds of student markets. They're the ones who need the new and alternative credentialing as much as any other population.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's a good point. And so MJ.
Hi, everybody. Good to see you. I just, and actually Carlene was in there before me, but just that I worry a little bit about a poll like this setting our agenda, particularly the other poll, the other results. There was very little variation among that I saw in the numbers. Given how different our systems are, oh, there's more variation than I recalled, sorry. Given how different our systems are though, you know, I think a lot of this is going to be very context focused, and that, you know, it would be good. I think I like Rebecca's Karoff's idea that we think about ways to combine these things and then allow the state systems and their institutions to vary in the work and the emphases that they place on it, just like the leadership Nash has done with TS3.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, it's a really good point, MJ. And what we're not showing here too is part of what we did in the survey was ask both what was important and what was easy or hard to do. And we have some additional analysis that we're not showing here, but helps us sort of understand that intersection of both what's important and what's the difficulty level, right, in trying to move it forward. So there's some additional data that we can use in design groups to drive some of the agenda.
And I think that you know, as we looked at those data, we were concerned about, you know, of course, you always want to look for the high impact, low lift for those early wins, the low hanging fruit, but we don't want to back away from the things that are hard, because we believe that may be, some of those may be where the real transformation can occur and are areas where we could really move the agenda forward if we, you know, got behind them as a collective. I think that MJ's point though is really a good one. Our systems are all in different places, and we need to understand that and reflect that in the way the agenda gets put together. As we did in TS3, we are going to be looking to the systems to really define and put the meat on the bone, so to speak, in terms of how some of this happens. If we can agree that we all want to move in a particular direction together, how that manifests itself in each system will certainly be different. But there's a lot we can learn from that variability across our network. So we see that as a strength, not a drawback, and it's something that but we also know that we don't want this to be lockstep. So Melody Rose, Nevada, you want to share your thoughts?
Sure. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Thank you. Yeah, so I do appreciate that some of these are more challenging agendas than others. And I guess from where I sit, the items that are high impact and low lift are the ones that are most easily managed as an individual system. And so where I see the real impact of collective work through NASH is at that level where it's the toughest stuff to do, because I think bringing together the larger numbers, those difficult lifts become slightly less difficult.
Great.
This is Nancy. I think one of the thoughts about the design teams is also to attach metrics. I really don't know of another entity within the Beltway that is trying to articulate a collective agenda and then potentially letting each system declare its highest priorities, cluster that into a set of metrics or outcomes. That's a tough one. It's a really tough one. But I think the only way that people are going to believe that we are prepared for a new normal is to show them. I mean, it's going to be a hard sell that universities are really going to be able to make a change, that a change that's needed. So there's a lot of individual system choice here, but there's also a lot of collective impact that we're seeking.
John Hayek also had his hand up earlier. I want to not miss him. John?
Yeah, thanks, Jason. I really appreciate all the great work on this from all you folks. I wonder, I'll go just a few specifics. When I was thinking about number 9, expanding professional development for graduate students, I felt like just broadening that out to just professional development for everybody, seemed like it might be a little bit more appropriate. And I think that's very important as we move forward. I also thought just fundamentally, how to incorporate student engagement in the definition of student success as a whole. This is our high impact practices. This is our student faculty interaction. This is our active learning, and I didn't really see that coming out very much on any of the strategies. I also wondered about, and I'm sorry, I'm just not as familiar with some of the other strategies that you put forward previously on the other imperatives, but I do wonder where technology and kind of how the artificial intelligence and just this, the innovation kind of as we move forward fits into kind of how we define student success in terms of customizing the learning experience around individual learners, and how do we maximize the strengths of particular faculty to kind of leverage kind of increase student outcomes. So I did wonder about that too. And just kind of one last comment, a broader statement. And I've worked at the state level, I've worked at the system level, I've worked at the campus level, and I do, and I'm sure, and a bunch of you have too. And one of the tricks, one of the tricky parts of any type of activity like this is really making sure the strategies fit at the system level. And we don't kind of wind up having strategies really that, systems that are really more focused on the campus level or institution level, And so, I mean, the system, obviously, as we all know, there are different types of systems, and you have different leverage, from a policy perspective, and also some systems play, the shield role as well across the country, and we know that. And so just trying to figure out a good balance of making sure the strategies are very consistent and that, that they're actionable at the system level versus at another level.
I think that's a great point. We know, right, if systems try to replicate what campuses do, that's retention comes into play. And if we can find the ways to leverage systems in a different way to help campuses do this work, it's the most biggest bang for our buck. John, I really appreciate you throwing those other items out there, because part of what I should have said early on, we know that this is not a final list. And what you all will get at the end of this is another survey asking you for additional items like that, John. So I hope you'll add some of those on, because we want to continue to add to these big ideas, because we know that you all are the brain trust, and we need more big ideas. And from when we first gathered these back in the fall, there's been a lot more thinking that's happened, right, in terms of how we move forward on all of these critical issues. So you're right, technology is critical. I think we talk a little bit more in the finance area, in the business area, but it's absolutely imperative for the student success notion as well. So thank you all. I think we're about at time here, so I want to be able to shift it over to Rebecca to make sure we have time for her. But again, appreciate your feedback and be on the lookout for that survey so that we'll get more ideas from you about sort of big ways to rethink the work that we're doing. Rebecca?
Okay, so now we're going to look at imperative 3, restructuring the education model for quality and equity. This is also a key element in taking student success to scale. As you know, closing equity gaps has been one of our 2 top priorities from the very beginning of that work, dating back all the way to 2014. We have always connected quality and equity. We've always said you can't do one without the other, but this became even clearer to us in the work that we did in 4 of the systems represented on this call today, who worked intentionally on learning assessment and quality, high impact practices. So making sure that we are attending to both of these issues is very important, as well as intentionally addressing the inequities and structural racism that we know are endemic in our systems. We also are thinking very clearly about the implications of the changing student demographics and thinking about what those elements mean for the way we approach our work. So next slide, Rohit. So now going to, this is the second part of the material that I sent to you yesterday. And here's another list. And Rebecca Karoff, I'm sure you'll say the same thing here. A lot of these connect. I'm not really clear in my own mind how we ended up with some of these under restructuring the education model and some of them in student success. They are clearly very closely linked. We're looking at policies, practices, priorities, programs, as well as root causes. Learning outcomes are important, resources are important, competencies. There are a lot of things on these lists, more than I can expect you to read on this slide. So I hope that you had a little bit of time to look at this list yesterday or remember it, for some of it from the conversations that we've had over the course of the fall. And so now what we want to do is go back to Mentimeter. So go back to your phone or that other browser window you were opening up, go back to the same code, and you will see the opportunity to pick the top 5 strategies. And again, what we want you to be thinking about here is not what might be the easiest to do, but what has the best potential to be transformative and which would most benefit from a collective approach. So in thinking about those 2, what would be the top 5 you would choose? So I'm going to give you a few minutes to do this. Of course, there are more to choose from on this list, 18 instead of 12. So we're going to see a wider spread, maybe not. We'll see what comes, but certainly need a little time to digest that list. I'll just give you a few more minutes here. Again, quite a wide spread, but we are seeing some kind of rise up to the top again. So clearly, a lot of these things are closely linked to some of the issues we just spent time talking about. But some areas of greater focus around students and equity and the importance of including quality in the way we look at these issues. Okay, so as I look across these, what I'm seeing is MJ's asking about credit for prior learning experience. That's somewhere here, MJ. I'm not sure I'm going to be able to put my finger on it, but I know it's in the background some of one of these. Maybe I'm not seeing it. Maybe it was on the previous group. I'm not sure. But anyway, it is definitely part of the model that we need to look at. So if we go to the next slide, you will see some of the things came up again in the same way. Tackling affordability, definitely a high priority. Investing in bridge programs, a high priority. But there are a couple that came through more strongly this time around than we saw earlier. Addressing the root causes of equity issues definitely was a priority, as was integrating internships across the materials. If you're going to go back a minute, Rohit, so but there's still also interest in some others. So if we think about how to approach these issues, it looks like we're seeing some good questions here. And maybe I will just stop talking and let you comment. Jason, you want to help out with any of the questions? I couldn't track them while I was looking at the slides.
Can if I come off mute. Theodosia, do you want to come off mute and talk about your comment there on faculty?
Sure. I was going to say one other thing that we are thinking about is really looking at those first-year courses to ensure our faculty who have a strong grounding in pedagogy, especially culturally responsive pedagogy, and UDL are the ones really taking the lead in the first-year courses to ensure success for our students as well as retention as we move them from freshman to sophomore year, which I think is also extremely important, just something I wanted to highlight.
Great, thank you. Yeah, really important point. MJ, do you want to say more about the prior learning assessment piece, which I think was in the previous section, but an important comment?
Yeah, and thanks, Rebecca Karoff noted that as well. Just the importance of and maybe it's not just prior learning assessment, but also training, faculty to appreciate and value all types of experiences that are coming that students are bringing with them into courses. And rethinking, and it's some of that may be in the problem-based learning, some of that's in some of these other ideas, but I think restating it in a way that makes clearer that this is about diversity of experience, thought, opinion, and finding ways to incorporate that more actively into pedagogy, in addition to prior learning assessment.
Yep. And again, ties back into so many other things, expanding right to adult learners, thinking about different ways of credentialing. Chris, Navia, you mentioned summer bridge programs, also important.
Yeah, we're actually going to be launching somewhat of a system-wide initiative. We're working on it right now, but every one of our chancellors has been concerned by the dramatic increase in the number of academic dismissals of students. And Summer Bridge, we're just really worried that these students are, and generations after them, or cohorts after them, are really not getting the let's put it this way, the robust preparation that they would normally get in their senior and even in their junior year. And so there's real concern that we're losing students we've already enrolled, and we're going to have students who come in with a pretty incomplete kind of academic preparation for college level work. So summer bridge programs are going to be increasingly more important for us to figure out what student support is needed, where our students really are at, and then how do we make sure that they make the transition from high school to college and then get all the way through that first year successfully. So Summer Bridge is something we're going to go really heavy on for a while, I imagine.
I think it's a great point. It also highlights there's probably a lot that we don't know yet that will be the implications of COVID, right? And how COVID has affected learning and student engagement. That Summer Bridge is going to be important, but probably more than that, there's things we don't know. Barb, do you want to mention Summer Bridge at Illinois?
Yeah, we actually have a state bill that's been passed by our legislature, but there's no money in it. So yeah, one of those unfunded mandates, but we're going to be working a lot on Summer Bridge. And my frustration, and I think many of our frustrations, is that we don't actually know what works and what doesn't work and what you have to do after the summer to continue supporting students. So we tend to throw the kitchen sink at students, and and we try lots of different things, and in the end we're spending a lot of money, but we don't really know what the critical key features of success are. So just want to throw that out. And while I have the floor just for a moment, can I just add, and I don't know if it goes here or in the previous goal, but I'm just wondering about the importance of civic engagement and teaching civic dialogue. We certainly are seeing right now a need to help students think about how to engage in critical conversations about democracy, difference, all of those things, that wasn't really an issue when you probably created all of this. You were thinking more about the racial strife, but now we've got civic engagement problems and media literacy problems that have to be tackled by universities in some ways. So I just wanted to throw that out too.
I think that's a super point, Barb, because that's part of the reclaiming the soul of the nation, a big push toward civic learning and democratic engagement is really powerful. I also wanted to say to you in your point about knowing what works, I think we have to put in this transformation agenda a much more disciplined discovery path for what works and what doesn't. And also, while I have the floor, I will say that I bet Jason and Rebecca are thinking the same thing. There's part of this that improves the student experience, and part of it is what we need to do to improve the student experience. And we've got a lot of overlap in these two planks more than the other three, I think, that we're going to have to sort out. And John saw that too. We're going to have to enlist your help so that equity and excellence and quality are in everything, and that we divide it maybe in a different way. That's why I'm struck by the conversation.
I agree.
I think there's also quite a conversation going on in the chat, started by Carlene. Carlene, you want to jump in and share what you said that got such a list of reactors?
Right. I think I see a mini theme there, reconfiguring the curriculum in a more student-centered way. So flexibility, also flexing the academic calendar, redefining that, turning it up on its head, competency-based education. And I think there was one thing about portability of general education as well. So something we're looking at in Wisconsin for transfer is that portability of not only the credits, but programs as well. So I just wanted to point out that mini theme. I think it's a healthy thing to show up there.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sure. So, colleagues, where do we want to take this now? We have a slide that says questions, comments, insights. I think that's where we have moved to. How's this striking you in terms of where we're going? Do you think we're generally on the right track, or have we piqued your interest? Hoping this is something you'll want to be engaged in? Nancy Shapiro, haven't heard from you yet today.
Thank you, Rebecca. So, I mean, all this stuff is quite important. One of the things I was thinking about, the idea of bridge courses or investing in bridge programs and making sure students are ready to come to college and what that means. We have to, either balance that or think about what that means when we also are talking about expanding to the adult learners, because we know that teaching adult learners is very different from teaching young students. The bridging that needs to take place is also potentially going to be the same or different, or what parts of it are same and different. And I also was thinking about what happens. I can't remember who mentioned asked the question about what happens after we matriculate these students, whoever they are, into our programs, and whether what's the system approach to things like creating communities of learning or communities of practice, how that would be a possible way of supporting students at all levels, which I think does have a pretty good record of evidence-based practice.
Archie, you had a follow-up on that?
I was just going to agree with Nancy, and what kept coming back to me is, how do we help students transition into our institutions based on where they are? How do we help them understand the assets that they bring, regardless of how they've ended up at our door? And so Bridge might be one way to do that, but I could think of other ways of doing it. So I just don't want us to think about one solution. I think we're going to have multiple solutions for the same problem.
For sure, for sure. Okay, Nancy, you want to take over on next steps here?
Well, we're doing just exactly what we wanted you to do. I love the gaps you pointed out, because they're just like, of course, we need to talk more about those issues that you've raised. And I think we might also go wide to go narrow. I think we will be more believable if we can find ways to structure this to channel provocative ideas into a limited number of strategies that we can really track. And so you've got to help us. The survey, it's very brief, it's a Survey Monkey in the chat, but we'll write to you after the session tomorrow to remind you to give us feedback. And this notion of the design team is fluid right now, because you can't really picture it, but it would include a small group of committed members looking again at the survey data, taking a look at those easy versus more difficult to adopt. The feedback today, we're doing, we hope to do, and I'm sure we will, a lit review of all the things that have been written since February about this expectation of how we're going to change and what are the pressure points for change that I think could inform us. We also want to align ourselves with the emerging federal agenda. So how do we do that? So we're going to come back to you with a survey. And then in the next slide, I guess I wanted to go back. I forgot where it was. I wanted to go back to design thinking. You can't go back there, Rohit. It'll crash the system. But I did want people to think about the architecture of being design thinkers, that we need to question what are the key ingredients to these ideas. What would we need to do as a system? I loved that point. We need to stick with what systems are capable of doing for the greater good and how that will help our campuses. So in the end, I want to remind you that we will, Rohit, next slide, be back with you in February for the other 3 categories. We'll have a little less time, but actually the one fundamentally reducing the cost, it's sort of laser. It's a very circumscribed set of activities that are being proposed. These 2 that we took on today are so broad. But then we have time to come back in March to see about our thinking and what's coalescing. You mentioned several times over how we could connect some of these items into a whole. So we should do that too. So we want your feedback. point one. And two, we would love to have volunteers for the design teams. And look at that. I know that you can't even see through this semester, but we do have April, May, June, July, August. We have time to really be very, very thoughtful. And I think in honor of all the work that has gone before at NASH, we want the integration of TS3, of our equity action framework, of our professional development, of our transfer. This is work that's really, really important to the new normal. So we want that integration. It's a big task, and Archie, you're saying at least the next webinar before we commit to design teams and that kind of thing, and design thinking, we will just keep it fluid and open until we get to March and see where we are. But that's a good point. If you've got an early inclination that you'd like to do some design team work, let us know. But putting people in groups and deciding how the groups are even clustered, we have time to do that. So anything that any of us have said that you want to come back to in these last few minutes, we need lots of help. We had to start somewhere. I think that's the way we feel today. Let's get started and see what people are saying. Anything else?
I also wanted to say that about the design teams, that it's definitely our intention that the work of the design teams will come back in front of all of you. So
absolutely,
you as the core team, and they're, you know, if you extend out to thinking about who was on our list back in the fall, who we sent the survey to, and who's been actively involved in these conversations, whether it's today or other meetings like this, it's about 100 people. And we want to keep all of you engaged in looking at this. So the design team work is really to help us focus and tee up the most important items for the rest of us to consider. So if your plate is too full, we certainly understand the many demands on your time to take on one of the design teams. Don't feel like you're not going to have another shot at this. You're definitely still going to be part of the conversation. So I just want to make sure that makes sense from your perspective.
And I think for some of you who want to, there are a lot of writing opportunities here. We're really getting some momentum on our blogs, and we certainly do that. We can feature design team work on our website, and it can go far beyond that. So lots and lots of options. Really good point, John. I think we do need to find ways to integrate the views of external partners. So when we get to partnering with a purpose, you might decide to task us with a webinar devoted specifically to a certain constituency. We've certainly had several conversations about our relationship with K-12, but we've not had a conversation with K-12 or our business and corporate leaders. And just think real hard. When I was listening to all this, I remember Tim White talking about mental health months and months ago, but I'm not sure I can point to a statement where you could have voted on student mental health, and we know how important that is. So just keep thinking about the omissions as well as the commissions. Anything else in the last few minutes? I want to thank Rebecca always for your vigilance and commitment to the work, to Jason Lane, who along with Maria Kahn managed the data analysis. We all had a hand in the survey development. Maybe that's what it looks like. A lot of cooks in this stew, but at any rate, I want to thank you all for that. And again, welcome Jim Johnson as a senior fellow. For the system heads who were on the line today, thank you as well for your leadership, and for everyone who came to the table. We are truly gratified.
Okay, great. Well, thank you all very much, and we look forward to seeing you soon. In the meantime, be safe, be well, and we'll be back together before you know it. Thanks a lot, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody. Aloha.
Thank you.
Bye.